Welcome to a special episode of the New Thinking for a New World podcast series focused on leadership. Today's world is short of a lot of things: hope, peace, prosperity. But what it lacks most is dynamic, innovative, global, values-based leadership. If we can find or nurture the right leaders, the rest will follow. Listen as two great leaders, human rights lawyer Jared Genser and photographer and storyteller Shahidul Alam, discuss how great leaders can change everything.
Hi, Jared. I've been meaning to get in touch with you for a long time, so this is a great pleasure for me and an opportunity. But no, it's kind of unusual to find a human rights lawyer who's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And the term extractor is a word one associates more with a dentist or perhaps Arnold Schwarzenegger. But political prisoners like me will appreciate the moniker given by the New York Times. Protecting individual rights against those who would deny them. What you do, and you do it persuasively in a strategic manner, and you're tenacious. And you talk about an asynchronous philanthropy model. Small investments, large returns. In terms of time and effort, they seem huge investments.
Well, first of all, thank you, Shahidul, for interviewing me, and to Tällberg, of course, for the award. I know you were a former political prisoner yourself for many months, and you know exactly the importance of the kind of work that I do. And everything I do for people exactly like you, who at great risk to themselves stand up to authoritarian regimes, knowing that their lives and security could be at stake. Yes, this is, of course, enormous investments of time and work. Some of my hardest cases can take thousands of hours if you're looking at individual political prisoner cases. And I've learned over the course of my career now, some 20 years, having done 50 cases of this kind from start to finish, how complicated it is to find the right set of legal, political, and public relations advocacy efforts to get my clients out of jail. Every case is different, every country is different, but there are obviously common approaches that one can undertake to try to get that done. But it can be very, very difficult and undoubtedly very, very time consuming.
Well, apart from the 50 or so cases, you've also written over 180 op-eds. I have no idea how you got to that. But you say you've never represented someone without having been asked. There have been some very high-profile names, Václav Havel, Aung San Suu Kyi, Desmond Tutu, Anwar Ibrahim, Mohammad Nasheed. But I'm curious about one of them, about Aung San Suu Kyi. How would you reflect on what she's become, her relationship with the junta, her denial of what is happening? You've had spectacular successes. Will you reflect on where you may perhaps have failed?
Sure. So, well, look, I mean, I represented Aung San Suu Kyi from 2005 to 2010, the latter 5 years that she was under house arrest. And my work on her behalf ended the day that she walked out of house arrest. Obviously, I think like many in the international community, I've been really deeply disappointed and saddened and horrified by the genocide denial that she and the Burmese junta have demonstrated in recent years with respect to the Rohingya ethnic and religious minority group in the country. And you know, as a human rights lawyer, I call it as I see it, and I speak truth to power whenever it is necessary to do so. That case has been harder for me because, as her former lawyer, I have an unfair advantage, and so it's been very to be able to speak out against her, and that has limited what I've been able to say. In fact, this is probably more than I've said publicly than in any other fora, simply because, again, I have an unfair advantage in criticizing her. When it comes to failures, unfortunately, I think all of us who have worked in any field for many years and seen some success find that success is only built on the back of many failures. So that has undoubtedly been my case too. If I think of my largest failure, and a very high-profile one. It was my work over literally over 6-7 years to try to get the Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo out of prison in China. I actually began representing him about 6 months before he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and then was his representative to the Norwegian Nobel Committee, along with a former client of mine who had been a political prisoner in China, Yang Zhenli. And, it was an extraordinary day to see the award presented to the empty chair. And I knew at that moment it was going to be a very, very difficult and long slog. I had gotten to know his wife, Liu Xia, and we spent years doing everything possible that you can imagine to try to get him out, testifying in a dozen parliaments, 20, 25 op-eds in newspapers, winning their cases at the United Nations, at one point getting a letter from more than 100 Nobel laureates across the 5 disciplines to sent to Xi Jinping. And ultimately all of that failed to ultimately get him out of jail before he died of liver cancer in a Chinese hospital. So, that was undoubtedly the worst day of my life professionally. When he died. Obviously, I'm not responsible for his death. The Chinese government is responsible for his death, and the world failed him. But as the only person actually, assigned by him and his family to represent him, there's no way to look at what happened other than as a very painful failure.
Well, I wouldn't say that, and I'm sure he wouldn't have seen it that way. But you're not new to this business. You were a young global leader of the World Economic Forum from 2008 to 2013. You've moved mountains, as you did in this case, to try and release the people you've championed. Now, the Tällberg Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, has asked you to be the volunteer diplomat in the post of Special Envoy on the responsibility to protect. What is next for you?
Well, that's a very exciting new position that I've taken on, and it's really about following through on the commitment of all member states of the United Nations in 2005, which adopted this doctrine called the responsibility to protect, which is about the obligation of all states to prevent and respond to mass atrocity crimes. And so I've been hired in this post to help develop a regional system within the Latin America region to help the organization become more effective at that kind of prevention work. A number of years ago, there would have been no thought that this was a real issue or concern in the region. But starting in 2014, the situation in Venezuela began to deteriorate substantially. And today, there are enormous alleged crimes against humanity taking place in that country. And just this week, or just last week, I released a report, my first report in this role for the OAS, that not only found that crimes against humanity were being committed in Venezuela, but also had no choice but to speak truth to power as it relates to what the ICC prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, has been doing with this case at the International Criminal Court. And unfortunately, she began a preliminary examination to the situation back in February of 2018, and almost 3 years later now has yet to even open a formal investigation into the crisis in Venezuela and these alleged crimes, which, in my view, is an abdication of responsibility on her part in light of numerous ways that we document that she has failed to follow through on her stated commitments to how she conducts these kinds of examinations. And this has resulted in greater impunity in Venezuela and a belief by Nicolas Maduro and his regime that they can commit whatever crimes they want with total impunity. And so this is much of the kind of things I do in lots of different roles that I've had in my career. And luckily, in this particular case, I have an extraordinary and visionary leader that I work with on this, Luis Almagro of the Organization of American States, who has been an outspoken advocate for freedom, democracy, and human rights in Venezuela, and also for the importance of this particular doctrine, the responsibility to protect.
Do you know leaders that sound like these? Leaders young or old who are changing the world, who are not content with what is and are willing to work for what could be. If so, nominate them for the Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Prize at tällbergprize.org. That's TALLBERG prize.org.
Were you ever approached by Julian Assange? If you had, how would you have responded? I say this because in many of the cases, you've pitted yourself against autocratic regimes. You've talked of getting states to live up to their commitments. But your own country, which has presented itself as a champion of freedom, goes against dissenters and whistleblowers. Where do you position yourself?
I would say my true north is, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and international human rights law. And when it comes to civil and political rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is a treaty that the United States is party to, along with most countries in the world, covering about 90% of the world's populations. More than 175 countries have signed and ratified that treaty. So, the reality is, for me, there are millions of people in the world who are arbitrarily detained, but that doesn't make them political prisoners. And by that, what I mean is as follows. You can be detained as exactly you were for your work, right? Which is, a violation of your right to freedom of opinion and expression, peaceful assembly, and these kinds of rights. And when that happens, that makes you a political prisoner. But often what accompanies those kinds of detentions is also a severe set of violations of your due process rights as a criminal defendant. The right to an independent, impartial judge, the right to the presumption of innocence, the right to access to counsel, the right to prepare and present a defense. And so if I look at Julian Assange's case, I think there were some violations on the due process side, but as a lawyer, that isn't sufficient for me to just be willing to take up any case. I really only represent political prisoners when it comes to these kinds of questions. And so while I appreciate that what perhaps he would describe himself as doing is exercising his free speech rights, his right to freedom of opinion and expression, when he made that massive document dump from WikiLeaks of all the State Department cables, they were not redacted, and they put thousands of people's lives at risk in a wide array of ways. And while he may have had a right to do that as a matter of freedom of opinion and expression, I don't have to like what a particular person does or the way that they approached it. And ultimately, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is a body that I had become a real expert at practicing before, and published a book late last year on it. It found that he was being arbitrarily detained in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Frankly, that was one of a very small number of working group opinions over the years that I strongly disagreed with, because the working group itself has said before that that the definition of house arrest is where you are kept in closed premises and physically unable to leave. And this was not the case, in my view, with Julian Assange. My view is that he voluntarily walked into the mission to escape being extradited anywhere for any alleged crimes, and he could have walked out at any time. And so for me, this would not have qualified as an arbitrary detention as such.
We're short of time, so I'm going to make this short. You are a high-flying lawyer, but a lot of the work you do is pro bono. You had your eye on the big prize, but the way you defined it was having the biggest impact possible and leverage and the most support to do that. But clearly an intense person. Are you a difficult person to work with? A lot of very intense people are. And if there is time, and we have very little, tell us a little bit about your new film.
When you talk about if I'm a difficult person to work with, I should thank my wife, Elaine, and my two kids, Alexander and Zachary, for tolerating me. Undoubtedly, I couldn't do anything without their love and support, and that of my parents, of course, as well. But I actually don't consider myself a difficult person. I'm probably a difficult person to be opposing counsel to, which is sort of by design, you might say. But the way that I conduct myself as a leader is that I try to inspire by my own actions. I try to give my staff, for example, at my law firm, who are brilliant, the ability to run, full speed ahead, and obviously be in direct touch with clients and to do all of that critical work. I know there's only so much I can do with my time and my day, and I desperately need to rely on others substantially. govern all of my work by the idea of the best idea should reign supreme. It doesn't matter where it comes from or who has it, right? Whether at the very top or the bottom of any particular hierarchy. And similarly, it's critically important to share credit and to give credit where credit is due. And so I think I'd like to think that we've had now at my law firm for the decade I've run it, more than 50 interns and externs, and we've had consistently positive feedback. But I guess just very quickly, I know we're out of time. I actually am working with Orlando Bloom, the actor and producer, on actually a television series, episodic drama for Amazon Studios, which is for Prime Video, which has 150 million viewers worldwide. And this is going to be a television show about a far more handsome and dashing human rights lawyer than me, fictionalized, based in Washington, that travels the world freeing political prisoners. So as I was joking when we were pitching Amazon, ultimately successful to decide to make this show, I said it would be a lot easier for me to get fake prisoners out of fake jails working on the writing team as compared to getting real ones out of real jails. So it'll be a nice change of pace and an opportunity to expose the issues that I care so much about to a much, much wider audience that isn't a specialized human rights audience.
Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. Now it's your turn. Tell us what you think. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or you can subscribe to our newsletter at Tällbergprize.org. Thanks again, and most importantly, don't forget to nominate a leader whose work deserves to be recognised and imitated. This podcast brought to you through the generous support of SNF, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.